privilege of having somebody who lives right here in Mashpee, Wendy Williams, who wrote The Language of Butterflies, and you see these books over here, which will be for sale. There are paperbacks and hardbacks later. I won't get too much into that. But anyway, Wendy is a world traveler. You see her in the plains, the deserts of Africa. You'd see her talking to people in Mongolia. She's been everywhere. And once she found out, I guess it was the Tate Gallery in London where she first saw that painting. I don't remember the name of it, but she saw butterflies, and she really loved that. She's been to the West Coast. She's been everywhere, and she follows the butterflies everywhere. That you do know they migrate. So anyway, she's been a reporter for the Cape Cod Times. She wrote a book called The Horse, The Epic History of Our Noble Companion, which the Wall Street Journal listed as their top 10 nonfiction books. She's she's thinking of writing a book. She'll tell you about the book she's going to write. But anyway, I would like us to give a warm welcome. One more thing I want to read. One more. I just read it. This is a quote from the Washington Post. A glorious and exuberant celebration of those biological flying machines, Williams takes us on a humorous and beautifully crafted journey that explores both the nature of these curious and highly intelligent insects and the eccentric individuals who coveted them. So, sounds like fun, right? Yeah. So let's give a warm welcome to Wendy Williams.
Back here. I hope I don't get lost. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, really, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay, great. This is really special for me to be here today because my book was published a year and a half ago. And as you might imagine, all the publicity that had been planned for this book had to be completely scrapped. So my first talk was going to be at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. Then I was going to go out to Denver to the Museum of Nature and Science. And I did do the Smithsonian Institution talk, but I did it on Zoom. After which I told my publicist that I had been traumatized and had PTSD and would not be doing any more Zoom talks ever, no matter what. And I'm glad to say that it's more than a year later and I've held to that promise. So everybody had to find out about my book just by finding out about my book. When Julie asked me to talk here, I said, well, I would love to, but I'm hoping I'll be in Australia then, because my next book is going to be about my border collie Taff, and it's going to take me all over the world. But of course, I still am not able to go to Australia and New Zealand and New Guinea and all those places I would like to go. But the good thing is I'm here, and this is my very first public book talk for this book that is now a year and a half old. So thank you so much, everybody, for being kind enough to come and let me actually see your faces. It's so much more fun than talking to a computer. When I gave my Smithsonian talk, it had to be an hour long, and at the end of it I thought, this is what crazy people do. They talk to themselves in the mirror for an hour, and I'm not doing it again. So now I know I'm a real person, and you're a real person. You're real people. And we're all here to enjoy butterflies. What amazing things they are. So this is a little bit of a formal talk because this is the talk I wish I'd been able to give at the Smithsonian, but you ladies are going to hear it instead. Ermin Strecker was, by all accounts, a very odd man. He had a long face and a long neck and an even longer, out-of-control beard. He looked like Moses. He had deep, sunken, grief-filled eyes. He lived the unkempt life of a zealot, going so far as to crawl in between his bed sheets at night with his boots on. By day, he was a poor stone carver who specialized in carving angels on children's gravestones. But by night, Strecker descended into a deeper, darker lust, a greedy compulsion that eventually dominated his entire existence. Some people want to possess money, others want to possess clothes or cars or stamps or houses or politicians. Strecker wanted butterflies. Lepidoptera. He yearned to own at least one species of every butterfly on Earth. He came close. By the time he died in 1901, having lived a life of intense emotional desperation, he had amassed tens of thousands of specimens. No one knows exactly how many. Some people say 50,000, some people say 100,000, 200,000, 350,000. There must have been precious little room in his house for anything else. What is known for certain is that his lepidopteral addiction bankrupted him. When he died, he left a wife and family with absolutely no money. Strecker was a hand-to-mouth kind of guy, but there was always money for another butterfly purchase. He was omnivorous, he wrote, never satisfied, like mine is after gold. My soul pines for Lepidoptera, he wrote. To someone who sent him a long-desired bird-winged butterfly, he wrote, there is no use trying to express my feelings at beholding the splendid Ornithoptera. That's what this butterfly is. Only to think the dream of my childhood fulfilled, for since I was 5 years old, I coveted and fretted for the green Ornithoptera. Here it is in real life, by the way, in New Guinea. Amazing, huh? Strecker was certainly not the only such Lepidoptera lover. For centuries, people have been creating a very special but not often discussed form of art, butterfly boxes. In a drab world in which color was a rare blessing, the language of butterflies, the language of color, was a precious thing indeed. There were no Disney films in those days, no computer screens or brightly lit cell phones, or even, for the most part, magazines or newspapers printed in color. Those were 20th century innovations. The colors that we take for granted today have not been accessible for most of human history for most people. But what they did have was butterflies. I could do an entire talk just on these boxes, and you would be so filled with flash and dazzle beauty that you wouldn't get bored. They're like stained glass windows. The human brain, after all, can never get enough color. This makes poor old Herman Strecker's yearning a bit more understandable. Butterfly addiction has been rather common. These are some of the boxes that I saw during my 2 years researching this book. First time I saw one of these butterfly boxes, I was just gobsmacked, I wrote in the book, because they're works of art, and they're done, obviously, with so much love by the people who create them. Look at this, box after box after box. This is our new director of the Marine Biological Laboratory, and he told that he was in California, and he told them he was not going to take the job unless they created a special facility for his 50,000 butterfly collection. And here's one of them. Butterfly addiction has been rather common. Consider Britain's Walter Rothschild, who lived the same time as Herman Strecker. He was said to be the world's richest man. Rothschild indulged in a great many eccentricities, going so far as to drive a team of zebras down to the Queen's house for lunch. He got in trouble because the Queen's kids came out and he was afraid the zebras were going to bite them. So he left. Rothschild had all kinds of strange addictions to the natural world, but his deepest passion was for butterflies and moths. He collected so many that he had an entire building constructed to house his butterfly boxes. He had to hire a full-time curator. His network of collectors spread worldwide. This is the Queen Alexandra's butterfly, which he paid someone to bring back for him from New Guinea. They discovered, and I've had the word discovered in quotes, this butterfly which has a foot-wide wingspan, if you can imagine. We say Rothschild discovered it, but actually the local people who lived there knew all about this butterfly. So this was called the Queen Alexandra's butterfly, and it became quite famous. Lepidoptera addiction thrived throughout the 20th century. Vladimir Nabokov, a Russian aristocrat born in 1899 and raised on an estate near St. Petersburg, was a native Russian speaker and also one of the most elegant English language novelists who ever lived. Nabokov and his family had to leave their native land in Russia because of the revolution. They moved first to Europe, but eventually came to the American Northeast. Nabokov once said that were it not for the revolution, these are famous, these were in Life magazine, magazines like that of Nabokov. If you'll remember, some of you might not know, he wrote a book called Lolita about an older man's fascination with a teenage girl. In the 50s, it was quite shocking. So he became very famous. I actually read it. I don't remember it though. Lepidoptera addiction thrived all through this time. Nabokov said that if it hadn't been for the revolution, he would have stayed on his estate in Russia and become a professional butterfly collector. Nabokov had a special relationship with color. He was a synesthete, and for him, words and numbers show themselves as colors. For example, if he thought of the number 5, he saw the number 5 in his mind's eye in the color red. His brain was wired a little bit differently, which might explain Lolita. Here's a depiction of one of Nabokov's most famous discoveries, the tiny gem now known as the Carner blue. We could find similar Lepidoptera lovers by dialing back the clock. In the 1600s, we find my favorite character in the book, Maria Sabila Marion, living in what's now Germany. At the age of 13, Marion began her research into Lepidoptera and lifestyles, research which was to last throughout her entire lifetime until she died in 1717. In the process, Marion created the foundation for the modern science of ecology, an achievement which is finally now, hundreds of years later, becoming widely acknowledged. Using a very simple microscope, she studied the caterpillars in her mother's garden and noticed that specific caterpillars use specific plants, today called host plants. Before her, no one had realized this. No one had looked that closely. So she drew the caterpillars on those plants. Then she drew the chrysalises made by the different caterpillars, and then drew the specific butterflies that emerged from those chrysalises, thus codifying the broad concept of metamorphosis. She did this, 13, 17, something like that. In other words, she showed that Lepidoptera were orderly in their behavior. A specific caterpillar would create a specific chrysalis from which would emerge a specific butterfly. Holy smokes! Nature was dependable. This was groundbreaking. This was a time when people said that women could sometimes give birth to rabbits. No one knew why, although they had their ideas, but they were pretty sure that that could happen. And all of a sudden, this 13-year-old girl comes by and says, "No, actually, I've studied, and this is what these butterflies do." It was her dedication to scientific accuracy which made her work exceptional. Marion was not allowed to publish in conventional journals because she was, after all, a woman and who wanted to read what she had to say. Nevertheless, she made her own book, she self-published it, and it became a bestseller all throughout Europe. There are not many copies of this tiny little gem left, but I was allowed to go to the American Museum of Natural History in New York, and see it for myself. Notice how my hands are on the table. I wasn't allowed to touch the book, but looking at it was really a treat. Eventually, she moved to Amsterdam, where women were allowed more freedom. There, she met a woman who showed her dead-pinned blue morpho butterflies, natives of the New World. This is one kind of blue morpho, which is actually on my jacket shoulder at a butterfly house that I went to. But when Marion asked about the lifestyle and life cycle of these startlingly beautiful butterflies, no one could answer her questions. So, at the age of 52, in 1699, she sold pretty much everything that she had to buy herself a boat ticket to go to Suriname in South America. You gotta love this gal. Education or no education, when she had a question, she wanted it answered. A born scientist. Hers may well have been the first privately funded scientific field study in the New World. Her findings there were remarkable. She had intended to stay for 5 years, but became quite ill, possibly with malaria, and returned after 2 years. But she and her daughter brought back a set of wonderful sketches art, really, watercolor art. She brought back all of these pictures from South America that showed the butterfly, the caterpillar, the plant that the butterfly uses, and I think there's an egg on here. I can't quite tell. But anyway, at this time, these were quite exotic. No one had ever seen this. For example, here's bananas, and she shows the butterfly that uses the bananas. And since we are sensationalist creatures, every once in a while she threw into the book that she created, not about butterflies, but enough to thrill her readers. Here's another one of hers. And the thing about this is these were scientifically accurate. She studied this. She wasn't just drawing a plant and drawing a butterfly. She had studied this. And so these were really the first published exhibitions of what butterflies actually did. When she came back to Europe, she again decided no one will publish her work, the men wouldn't, so she made her own book. And the thing about this book that I have to tell you that is most remarkable, all of these pieces of art are hand-painted. She and her daughter, I think she had two daughters, and I think the second daughter helped her with this. They hand-painted each and every one of these, so they were meticulous. They didn't paint outside the lines, by the way, which is to her credit. I was thrilled to be able to look at this. This is one of the originals. Again, there's not very many. But what you can do now is buy your own copy, because there's a facsimile made by a company in Holland now, and you can get exactly what she did, printed, of course, for $100. So if you want to later, you can come and look at some of her wonderful artwork, or you can order a $100 book from your own favorite bookstore. Her findings were so remarkable that she became, at that point, world famous. Even the Tsar of Russia, I can't remember which Tsar it was, there were lots of them, but when she died, the Tsar of Russia was the first into her house to buy as much of her artwork as he possibly could find. So the language of butterflies contains many more examples of people who fell down that rabbit hole, who found themselves looking closely at butterflies and moths and then at caterpillars, and found themselves so deeply immersed that they became addicts. What is it about butterflies that affect people so strongly? In a word, color. The flash and dazzle colors of butterfly wings glinting in bright sunlight on a warm summer day hypnotizes the human brain. We can't resist. We evolved to love butterflies and their colors. In recent years, science has begun uncovering deep-seated responses in the human brain, not just to colors, but to specific colors. They have found out, for example, that when people are given red-colored pills, the pills improve their alertness. But when they're given blue-colored pills, they fall asleep. If you want to give someone an antidepressant, color the pill yellow, because it'll have an effect. And red. Don't get me started on red. Red is the attention getter all over the world. Stop signs are red. Red lights mean stop all over the world. Our interest in the color red is deeply embedded in our evolutionary heritage. It's processed not in our brains consciously, but it's also processed in our brains in unconscious ways. When you see the color red, your brain registers that color red without you being aware of it, and more quickly than any other color in the universe. You immediately see red like that. That's why it's so universal. So let's look at the evolutionary heritage. This is Cayo Santiago, and this island is famous for having a number of macaques. It turns out that free-ranging macaques have been shown to be drawn more to males who exhibit the strongest red in their collection. Are you in love yet? This is apparently one sexy guy. Artists have long known that we react strongly to red. Look at Pete Mondrian and how he contrasts red with blue. And again, red. What's your eye drawn to? Red. Or look at J.W. Turner. This is the painting that I saw this when I was 20. I walked into the Tate in London, wandering around with nothing to do. I had no idea who J.W. Turner was, but I walked in, and this painting was completely across a whole wall. It was huge, and I'd never heard of J.W. Turner, but I said, wow, this is amazing. Or Turner, of course, knew how to use the color red, but you can get all the way back to the Renaissance and find out what they did in paintings like Primavera here in order to get your attention. The red is right in the middle. And guess what? That's exactly what butterflies do. They use the color red to great effect. So why do you suppose that the red are on the tips of the wings here and here? It's because if a bird attacks the red, the butterfly will survive. But if the bird goes to the center of the butterfly body, then the butterfly dies. So birds are drawn to that color red and will attack there instead. So red, for some animals, for some living things, is actually a kind of camouflage. It changes your attention. Even babies love these kinds of colors. I know, but when you look at these mobiles, they're often of butterflies. This one I think is a kind of an imitation monarch. So I love to go out and walk around and look for butterflies, but I also love to go to butterfly houses. I love seeing the butterflies, of course, and if you're feeling kind of grumpy, then you can turn into a Hermann Strecker too and get really joyous and excited just by looking at the butterflies. But it's more fun for me to look at how the kids respond to the butterflies. They get so excited, and this is me, and on my shoe there is a blue morpho, and look at the kids just on the ground surrounded by it. I don't know why the blue morpho decided to land on my shoe, but he did. And the children are absolutely fascinating. Where do you find butterflies? On Cape Cod, the myth is that there are no butterflies on Cape Cod, but actually there are quite a bit. You just have to go look for them. I found my own butterfly guide for the book, Joe Dwelly. Joe Dwelly and I and my husband went out to look here. This is a field at Crane Wildlife. And Joe found 20 different species of butterflies right in that small area. So they're there, we just have to look for them. Of course, you can find these things in the Cape Cod, or you can find them by visiting butterfly overwintering sites. Most of you know, or maybe not, a lot of people know that monarch butterflies migrate in the fall, and they overwinter on various trees, sometimes in California. And you can go to California and see these wonderful overwintering places, and for example, Pacific Grove. Pacific Grove in the 1920s became famous because tens of thousands of butterflies would migrate all the way down to this little coastal town. It's not really a city, it's a little town. And people would flock from all over the place to see them. And this used to be called the Butterfly Town. And as you can see, color is a really big deal in Pacific Grove. The town created a whole children's parade around monarchs, and it was a real important celebration. And John Steinbeck even wrote about it in one of his books. I forget what the book title was. When I was younger, I went there with some family, and this is what the monarchs look like nested on a branch right there in Pacific Grove. It's amazing. And what you really, I can't even begin to describe. If the sun comes out and the butterflies suddenly decide to fly in the sun, you're just surrounded by this sparkle of color. But that was the old days. There's still butterfly parades, there's still a big festival. But last winter, I returned to Pacific Grove to relive the experience, and this is what I saw. There are almost no butterflies there now. I hunted and hunted, and this is the best thing that I could possibly find. What a paucity compared to the glory of a couple of 20, 30 years ago. Here, they still have butterfly trails, and you can go and look for the butterflies. This is Pismo Beach that I write about. but there's nothing there. So why is this? We don't really know why this is. Sometimes it's just because the trees that the butterflies are used to perching on and love to perch on, a winter storm will knock the trees down so they don't have any more trees. But there's other reasons as well. It could be climate change, it could be overbuilding, it could be pesticides, it could be massive wildfires. On the other hand, it could be not enough wildfires. We don't really know why. And the one thing that we do know is that there is a lot of change. So can we do anything about it? Absolutely. This is one of my favorite butterfly scientists. I love this t-shirt, by the way. That's a monarch caterpillar with a question mark on it, because David's a scientist and he's trying to find out what's happening to the butterflies. So his philosophy, his theory is that it has something to do with pesticides. But what can we do about it? Can we do anything about it? You bet. We can do a lot about it. For example, we can start to plant pollinator habitats all over the place. And this is one example. You can look it up on the web and find out what to plant where. So one of the things that people are trying to do is get people to go back to some of our native plants. Grass, as we think of it normally in suburbia, is pretty boring. This is a prairie grass, a bunch of prairie grasses. And what you can see is that what's on top is nothing compared to the root system on the bottom. And it's the root system that people are looking for because that creates the soil, that keeps droughts from happening. It just creates a whole foundation for all kinds of wildlife to live in. There's one prairie grass. Here's two kids. The little kid's showing what's above the ground, and the big kid is showing what's below the ground. This is non-natives and natives. So yes, we can do something about it. What can we do about it? Well, we can do that, but we can also encourage people to participate in citizen science projects. For example, this is 5-year-old Amelia Jabusek, who is featured in my book. Amelia became very famous because she was part of David James's butterfly project, and she tagged a butterfly that she caught with one of David James's tags. So you can't read that here, but what can happen is this Amelia tagged the butterfly with this tag, and then the butterfly was photographed by someone with a cell phone on a rooftop in San Francisco, and then in one place, and then in another place. And so every time you see one of these butterflies with a tag, take a picture and then you email the picture to the scientist, and he assembles all the data to show the paths that these butterflies have taken. One of the things that Amelia, at 5 years old, helped us discover is that when butterflies go to overwinter, they don't stay at one place. We used to think they would find one tree and spend the winter there. That's not what they do. They move from place to place to place. So this is another thing that you can do. You can also be part of a tagging program like that. This is on the other end of the age spectrum. This is Chip Taylor, who is the Dean of Butterfly Science. Chip is 80-something years old now, and he keeps up a travel schedule that would exhaust a 20-year-old. His thing is telling people all about how to plant the right kinds of plants and how to take care of the butterflies. And he gives workshops. I went to a workshop that he gave in Oklahoma to a Native American tribe, and we walked through this field that was so complicated, complex, so many different plants in just that tiny little area. Chip showed all of us all the different plants that were there. This is a field that has never been plowed, to people's knowledge. It's never been plowed. It's just so rich with so many different species. So what he did was teach all of us how to get together. I don't think I'm in this picture. Oh, there I am. I'm there. But he showed all of us how to go through a field like this, how to get the seeds, save the seeds over the winter, and then plant them again. So yes, there's a lot of things we can do, and for monarchs in particular, we can do a lot. You can plant milkweed, all different kinds of milkweed, depending on where you live. These milkweed plants now are free, or you can go to Mahoney's. That's what I did. I'm lazy. Mahoney's has a whole section now for pollinator plants. And you can plant them, and if you plant them, they will come. I had a wonderful a visit yesterday from a fellow, or last week from a fellow who came and sat on my front porch, and he was talking to me about important things, very earnestly. And then all of a sudden he stopped, and he looked around and said, "You have monarchs?" And I said, "Yes, we do." He was entranced. The whole conversation stopped while he got used to all these, and I have to admit they were beautiful. Flying among all the flowers, there's 5 of them in my yard now. They're getting ready to head south, but we have 5 of them now all over the place. And it's really, there's nothing you can add to your garden that's more beautiful than resident butterflies. So I've told you about going to California to see them, but a better place, well, it's just as good, it's different. I decided for the end of my book to go to Mexico to see the monarchs because, of course, some of you may not know, on the west side of the Rockies, the monarchs collect and fly to the coast, and they spend the winter on the coast in California. Very nice idea, if I do say so myself. East of the Rockies, all the monarchs fly. They collect in columns, and they fly over the Mexican border, sometimes so that they look like an actual river of butterflies. There's so many of them. They fly almost to Mexico City, then they take a sharp right turn, and for some reason, nobody knows how did this start. They fly up to a very specific place up in the mountains about 10,000 feet high. And that's where they spend the winter. You can go now and see them at this overwintering site if you want to. So my husband and I decided to go. We had only a weekend, so we flew to Mexico City. And we stayed in a Marriott, and I talked to the Marriott ahead of time. I said, so I need a guide that can take me up there. Do you have someone who's dependable? Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So a lovely guide picked us up right at the hotel, drove us 3 hours up to this place, up to this, El Rosario is the name of the place. And we started to walk up to see the butterflies, and you could see that it's just a completely butterfly area. And there's Jose, my wonderful guide, who was so kind to me. You have to walk up a hill. Well, a hill is an understatement. I have to say, I think it was from 10,000 to 11,000 feet. And at several times, my husband was like, "Oh, this is so much fun." I said, "Fine for you." But anyway, Jose stayed with me. He wasn't going to leave me alone. So I would walk a few steps, and I said, "I don't think I can go any further." He said, "Oh, that's okay. If you don't want to, Miss Wendy, we'll just wait here for a while." And then I'd say, "Well, maybe a few more steps." But after a long time, it was only a mile, but it was a high mile. My lungs prefer to have Cape Cod-style air. We got up there to the top, and this is a photo of where they overwinter. You can't really see them because it's just this mass of darkness. You know, when monarchs are clinging to something, they close their wings, and so it's dark. But what you want is for them to open their wings, and that's when you see all this wonderful beauty. So on our way up, this was a slow walk for me. Jose was very patient, but what we saw on the walk up was a stream of butterflies flying all the way down the mountain right beside us. And they would stop for a while and rest. They were going down for water at the bottom of the mountain. I was going to say hill, but it wasn't. It was a mountain. It was just unbelievably gorgeous. The sun came out. The butterflies were everywhere. So yes, you can see butterflies. They're still here. And there's a lot that we can do about it. Are we losing butterflies? Yes. Are they going to become extinct? No, they're not going to become extinct. But if you want to see the beauty of these little things, this is the one that Nabokov loves so much. If you want to be able to enjoy all of this, you can just, this is technical stuff, if you can, just plant a pollinator garden, go to see where they overwinter, and butterflies will still be in your life. There you are. So I can take a few questions.
What is the lifespan of a monarch or other butterflies?
What's the lifespan of a monarch? So I should say, first of all, that the lifespan of any butterfly is very specific to that species. But for monarchs, it's also specific to the time of year that the butterfly emerges from the chrysalis. This is what was fascinating to me. Normally, you might get a lifespan of the butterfly flying around for maybe 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks if they have a free lunch with milkweed wherever they go. But they don't live very long. However, the butterflies that are about to be born from now until the end of August might live as long as 9 months. In the book, you'll read about how the monarch butterfly's biology changes at the end of the summer due to the angle of the sun. Something about the chemistry in the caterpillar changes so that instead of being programmed, genetically programmed, I don't like that word, but that's what comes to mind, to live a 3-week lifespan, they are programmed to slow down their metabolism even while they're flying thousands of miles to Mexico or California, and they might live up there. They'll go up into where they're roosting for the winter, and some of them, not all of them, but some of them may actually be able to live long enough to fly all the way back to Canada. So there are a few records of amazing monarch butterflies that we know now have flown all the way down from Canada, made it to Mexico, made it up into the mountains. Then the winter's over, their biology changes again, some switches flip in their brains, and they make it all the way back to Canada. So maybe they're living a year. That's rare, but it can happen. So one of the things we know about monarchs, and one reason why I don't think they're going to become extinct, is that they are unbelievably flexible. I think of them as kind of like the coyotes of the butterfly world. You know, they seem to be able to change when the climate changes, when the ecosystem changes, and find all kinds of ways to get along. They actually, they originated in the American Southwest and northern New Mexico, but now monarchs live all over the world. Australia has a huge monarch migration. New Zealand has monarchs. Guam has monarchs. How did they get there? Nobody really knows. But they're called a weedy species, but I don't really like that word because I don't think they're weeds. But they're very flexible. Other butterflies, like the little one that I showed you that Nabokov discovered, are not at all flexible. They have a very specific lifestyle that they have to live, and if they don't live that specific lifestyle, then they will become extinct. So it really depends on the kind of butterfly it is. What scientists are worried about with monarchs is that this amazing migration might disappear, and that would be a big loss to the world.
But pesticides will kill them. Pesticides, right?
Yes, that's a complicated conversation, but a lot of pesticides, you know, even the monarchs, all butterflies are very carefully tuned to the world around them, and when you use certain kinds of pesticides, that interrupts all their systems. So even some pesticides which have been thought to be innocent, if you can use that word, it turns out that what those pesticides do, you still see the butterfly emerge, but instead of having the butterfly live its full lifespan of 3 weeks and laying eggs during that 3-week time, because the female just lays eggs if she finds a male, which she will, the males will find her. She will just lay eggs throughout the whole of her lifespan. The butterflies emerge and they look fine, but they don't live as long. So you get you get smaller and smaller crops. The world of pesticides is complicated.
Yes, we were sent a letter by the town of Nashville not to use any types of fertilizers because it damages the water system. And my question was that you can specify organic versus not organic. So you're saying that no matter...
No, I'm not saying that at all. That's why I didn't really address this in the talk. It really depends. I would suggest, if you want to know about pesticides and which are okay to use and which are not okay to use, you go and have careful conversations. There's a lot of information about this on the web because it depends on what you use, the time of year that you use. I mean, if you use a pesticide basically is to kill insects. So, but there are some that are more specialized and more finely tuned that are less harmful, and it depends on when you apply it. If you apply it to a plant right before the female monarch comes, then maybe you'll have a problem. But if you wait until after monarch season, then you won't have a problem. So it's very, very complicated. I would not like to tell people not to use any pesticides no matter what. But I think if you're careful, you can do it. There are new pesticides developed now that are less harmful. What scientists really complain about are a class of pesticides called neonics, which is short for neonicotinoid, and they don't like those at all. So I can't tell you what brands those are, I don't know.
Do you put fertilizer in the same class as a pesticide does?
Fertilizer. Well, that's a different issue because the fertilizer does not bother the butterflies. What the fertilizer does is it puts a lot of things in the water table that encourage things to grow, things that you don't want to grow, like making your ponds yellow and orange and scummy. So that's what that is, you know. And again, I don't know enough about fertilizers. I do know that in our case, my husband is now chief of the garden. He wasn't interested at all, but now he's the chief, so I have to ask him what he does. But he uses a little bit of fertilizer, but he only uses at certain times of year. He's very sparse with it. And the advantage of having these kinds of pollinator gardens is once you get it going, you don't need fertilizer anymore. You don't need to use that stuff. Now, I'm going to tell you, he put some stuff on his beloved roses. So I don't think any rule that says absolutely yes or absolutely no is good. But I think maybe the overall gist of it is be as sparing as you can.
I just want to mention that the Museum of Natural History in New York has a wonderful exhibit on butterflies. You actually go into the room and you see them flying around. So if anyone would like to see that, that is a wonderful way of seeing a variety of
I've heard that that's wonderful. I've never been there at the right time of year to be able to see it. And then it was the pandemic, so someday I'm going to get to see that, yeah.
And I think the Science Museum in Boston has it as well.
I'm sure they do.
in Brewster.
And Brewster, right. I love going to these places. People say, oh, it's not as much fun because you don't have to hunt for them. But I like looking at the people when they see them. You know, they're just these smiles of joy. It doesn't matter how old you are. You just get the smile of joy. Any other questions? Thank you guys so much for coming and listening to my talk.
Can you mention her book? Because I think it's interesting.
Oh, yes. We have another butterfly book author here. She's going to tell you quickly about her book.
It's about the tale of the scorpion and the caterpillar. It's for children.
It's for children.
And it's basically how they become friends, even though they're enemies, but they were both young. And it's a cute little story. It's on Amazon, and it's called The Tale of the Scorpion. Thank you so much.
All right.
I just have a quick question.
What?
What's the difference between a moth and a butterfly? Is it
I have a long discussion of that in my book.
Oh, you do?
So there are rules of thumb that people are given, and the rules of thumb are often broken. So the best thing to do is to read that discussion, because it was really fun. I went to Harvard, and I wanted to see their butterfly collection, and a very lovely young lady brought out a box, and she said, which of these is a moth and which of these is a butterfly? And she had 4 pairs of 2 like that, and I picked the wrong one every time because I used the rules of thumb. So you can look at the antenna and maybe tell, and you can look at a few other kinds of clues, but the truth is it really doesn't work. So that's a great section in the book to read. The one thing I will tell you that I thought was a fun fact was moths have been around for ages. They're nothing new, whatever. They were on trees. But then about 130 million years ago, flowers evolved. And when flowers evolved, then butterflies evolved. So butterflies and flowers are like a marriage that has lasted for 130 million years. If you guys want to buy some books, there's some books here, and I'd be glad to sign them for you. Otherwise, thank you this is making my book. I finally feel like I'm an author again. Thank you.